You know when you're, like, walking through a really old forest,
Oh,
right?
yeah. Love a good forest walk.
Right, and you see one of those massive towering oak trees. I mean, from the outside, it looks majestic. The leaves are totally green. The branches are sprawling. It looks like the absolute picture of health.
Yeah, totally solid.
But then maybe just a seemingly mild storm rolls through, and that giant tree completely collapses. And when you walk up to the stump, you realize the entire core of the trunk was just completely hollowed out, like totally rotted away.
Oh, yeah.
The tree was technically still producing leaves, but the internal structure that actually kept it alive had been, dead for years.
Right. So the visible output, the leaves, they were still there,
Yeah,
but the invisible engine of the tree's survival was just gone.
exactly. And that hollow tree is, well, it's the perfect image for what we are exploring today in this deep dive. We are going to go through this incredibly thought-provoking essay by Elias Kunis called Sterile Generativity.
It is such a fascinating read.
It really is. And I want to ask you, the listener, a question. Have you ever felt like you're checking off all the boxes at work? Like you're hitting all the performance metrics, the quote-unquote leaves look great.
Right. The spreadsheet is green.
Yeah, the spreadsheet is green, yet absolutely nothing feels like it's actually growing or improving. Like you're moving super fast, but going literally nowhere.
I mean, that feeling is incredibly common right now. And it's not just in our workplaces. Kunis points out that this phenomenon is quietly taking over, well, our institutions, our art, and even our family structures.
Okay, let's unpack this. Our mission today is to look at the invisible mechanisms that keep our society, our art, and our work actually alive. And, maybe more importantly, we are going to examine exactly how those mechanisms are just quietly consumed, while the surface level metrics tell us everything is totally fine. We're diagnosing the rot inside the tree.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. To understand why things feel so hollow despite us producing, like, so much stuff all the time, we first have to break down what actually happens when humans create something.
Right, the fundamental process.
Exactly. So Kunis argues that every healthy generative practice produces two distinct things simultaneously. The first one is the visible output.
Okay.
That is the song, the quarterly report, the medical treatment, the harvested crop. This is what we measure, right? This is what we
What was
sell
the
with.
leaves on the tree? The stuff we can just put on a spreadsheet.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But the second thing produced is this invisible future capacity. Kunis calls this the generator chain.
Generator chain. Got it.
Right. It is the deepening of musicianship, the accumulation of craft, the thickening of institutional memory, the slow formation of taste. It's this unmeasurable temporal chain that allows a practice to reproduce itself into the future.
Like passing down knowledge.
Yes, exactly. It's the passing down of knowledge from a master to an apprentice or from a parent to a child.
And sterile generativity, which is the title of the essay, happens when the visible output survives, but that invisible future capacity is consumed or completely bypassed. So the metrics actually improve, but the lineage just dies.
Right.
It sounds a lot like eating the seed corn. You get a really great filling meal today, so the output metric, people fed, looks absolutely fantastic on the daily report, but you are literally destroying your capacity to have a harvest next year. Is that what Kunis is getting at?
Yes, that is a perfect analogy. And what's fascinating here is how Kunis makes a crucial point regarding that dynamic.
Right.
The output itself isn't the problem.
Right, like eating is good.
Eating is very good. Closing IT tickets is fine. Streaming a song is harmless. The failure mode happens when a practice occupies a generative slot in society like education or parenthood or engineering, but it stops reproducing the temporal chain that gave that slot its function in the first place.
So you're preserving the artifacts, but ceasing to reproduce the chain.
Exactly.
And the essay provides a literal diagnostic test for this, which I found so fascinating. It asks this operational question: does a practice produce future generators or only consumable outputs? Like, does it train taste? Does it create apprenticeship? Does it raise the standard for the next generation? If the answer is no, the practice is sterile.
And we can see this play out across wildly different domains. Kunis categorizes these as specimens of sterility.
Oh, let's get into the specimens.
Yeah, so take modern white-collar work, for instance. He references the philosopher Robert Pirsig, pointing to the loss of quality in our daily jobs.
Right, Pirsig.
Think about how many office environments operate today. A task is completed, a ticket closes, the dashboard shows green, but no craft deepens.
Nothing hardens.
Right, no standard hardens. The worker leaves the job literally no more skilled than they entered, and the institution carries no accumulated competence forward. Process compliance has just completely replaced craft.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting, though, because I have to push back a little on this.
Sure, go for it.
Wait, but isn't making work easier and faster a good thing? I mean, if I can close a ticket using a pre-written template without agonizing over it, isn't that just efficiency?
It seems like it, yeah.
So where is the line between healthy efficiency and sterile generativity? Like, why do I need to bleed over a keyboard just to prove I'm building craft?
That is the big question, and Kunis addresses this directly with an asymmetry principle.
Yeah.
He says it's not about difficulty. Difficulty is not the variable here.
Oh, really?
Yeah. You can have incredibly difficult, grueling work that produces zero learning, that is highly sterile.
Yeah.
And you can have very easy, efficient work that trains your discrimination, deepens your skill, or accumulates institutional memory, and that is generative.
Oh, okay. So it's not about the sweat, it's about the compounding skill.
Precisely. The strict diagnostic test is simply whether the doing of the work makes the next doing more capable. If you were just interchangeably executing a protocol, the generator that work used to be is completely consumed.
That makes the distinction so much clearer, and it really hits home when we look at how this applies to art, specifically like the rise of AI music.
Oh yeah, that's a huge one right now.
We are producing music at an unprecedented scale right now.
We are. Models trained on the distribution of all prior recorded music can just generate tracks endlessly, and, the output is musical.
It is. It's recognizable, it's pleasant, it hits the right beats.
Right. But what is completely bypassed is everything that historically constituted being a musician.
The friction. Kunis talks a lot about friction here.
Yes, the friction is key.
Like, I'm imagining the teenager carrying a heavy amp up 3 flights of stairs, right? Playing to an empty room, bombing on stage, adjusting their sound. That is the generator chain.
Exactly. Those years of friction with an instrument build the capacity. The apprenticeship within a local music scene demands competence before it bestows status. That slow formation of personal taste through exposure and failure is the real product.
Right.
Now, using AI as an instrument by a musician to expand their capacity, that's generative. But substituting the AI model for the generator chain itself, that means the output is preserved. We get millions of streamable tracks, but the practice of being a musician is not being reproduced.
And we see that same hollowing out of taste when Kunis talks about indiscriminate art. He argues that funding art can actually destroy it if you remove all selection pressure.
Which sounds counterintuitive.
It does. And he isn't talking about bad art, by the way, because bad art is actually highly generative. We learn what good art is by making and seeing bad art.
Right. Trial and error.
Exactly. He's talking about a system where there is no standard by which the work could possibly fail.
Yeah, when validation is simply bestowed by a guaranteed grant, or maybe by an algorithmic attention metric that just rewards shock value or pure volume, nothing can fail.
And when nothing can fail, nothing can be excellent.
Right. The production of art-shaped artifacts continues, but the transmission of discrimination, the chain by which one generation's taste makes the next generation's taste sharper, is just consumed.
Man, if that's what is happening to our individual skills and our personal tastes, the picture gets so much darker when you scale this up to massive institutions.
It really does.
Let's look at the specimen of financialization. The essay uses Boeing as the prime example here.
This is sterile generativity in its absolute cleanest economic form.
Okay, break that down for us.
Well, a productive system only exists because someone historically formed productive capital. In aerospace, people built factories, they trained engineers, they accumulated vast amounts of tacit knowledge, and they won customer trust over decades.
Actually, let me pause on tacit knowledge for a second, because we hear that term thrown around a lot in business books. That's the stuff you can't put in a manual, right?
Yes, exactly.
It's the 30-year veteran engineer knowing exactly how a specific rivet should sound when it goes into the fuselage. And you can only learn it by standing next to that veteran for 5 years.
That is the perfect translation of tacit knowledge. It is deeply human, undocumentable expertise. And financialization is the practice of extracting yield from that inherited tacit system rather than rebuilding it.
Extracting rather than building.
Right. So instead of investing heavily in R&D or taking the time to maintain that mentorship chain between the veteran and the junior engineer, a company might use stock buybacks or financial engineering to return cash to shareholders.
And the outputs continue for a while. Like, shareholders are paid out, quarterly earnings look great on paper.
But what is being actively consumed is the underlying substrate, that specific engineering competence and institutional memory. Kunis points out that with Boeing, the output of a profitable airplane manufacturer was preserved on paper for years, while the generator of an organization capable of making safe airplanes was completely hollowed out.
Wow.
And as the MAPS crisis showed us, once that temporal chain of competence is broken, once the veteran retires and the junior engineer was never properly mentored because the training budget was slashed,
Yeah.
you can't just reinstall that knowledge like a software update.
Because it takes decades to grow the inside of that oak tree. You can't just mandate it back into existence.
Exactly.
And we see this exact same structural rot in what Kunis calls institutional evergreening.
Yeah, think of our research universities or large hospital systems.
Mhm.
A university might produce more published papers and grant more degrees than ever before.
Outputs are up.
Way up. But if the apprenticeship model, where a senior professor closely mentors a graduate student, is replaced by cheap adjunct labor, teaching 5 classes a semester with no time for research,
Right.
and the incentive becomes a pure paper mill of publishing trivial findings, then the capacity to do actual paradigm-shifting research is consumed.
And the hospital is exactly the same. It continues to deliver care on paper, it hits all its billing codes, but if senior clinicians burn out and leave, and the next generation of doctors is trained merely to follow insurance-mandated protocols rather than developing that tacit clinical judgment, the actual medical competence of the building is consumed.
Yeah.
The name on the building stays the same, but what it points to is no longer what it was.
Which brings us to perhaps the most sensitive but intellectually fascinating specimen Kunis presents, and that's children-as-eldercare.
Oh, yeah. This one is a trip. It's a critique of a very common natalist argument you hear in policy discourse today.
Right.
Politicians will say, we need people to have more children so there will be a tax base to run the economy or to care for us in our old age.
And Kunis argues this framing essentially inverts what a child historically represents. Historically, reproduction was an active opening toward an independent, unknown future. The child was a generator of new perspectives, new projects, new ways of being.
Right. The investment in raising a child was costly precisely because the return was something other than the parent.
Exactly. But when you reframe the child primarily as future service capacity for the parent, you collapse that possibility space.
You're boxing them in.
Yes, the output a human being born is preserved, but the generator, a posterity that exceeds and surprises the parent, is consumed. The child is recruited as a retirement insurance policy, rather than received as an autonomous future-bearing agent. You are literally consuming the future to service the present.
Man, if this exact same hollowing out pattern is happening simultaneously across music, airplane manufacturing, family planning, white-collar work, art, and academia, it really suggests a massive macro-level environment driving it.
Yes, and Kunis introduces a broader civilizational framework to explain this. If we connect this to the bigger picture, he categorizes societies as operating primarily in either a foundry mode or a hospice mode.
So what does this all mean? Let's define those, starting with the foundry.
Sure. A foundry civilization actively builds generators. Its dominant practices train apprentices, build new institutions, accumulate productive capital, and raise standards over time.
So it's looking ahead.
Right. It is focused on renewing the substrate. It welcomes the friction required for growth.
And a hospice civilization.
A hospice regime optimizes for comfort, risk avoidance, and surface continuity over generator renewal.
Wow, okay.
It's characterized by intense activity directed at maintaining the present configuration, while progressively ceasing to generate the underlying substrate. Sterile generativity is simply the practice-level mechanism by which a hospice civilization expresses itself. Kunis uses the term anticentropic behavior to describe this.
Hold up. Anticentropic sounds like a villain's master plan from a sci-fi movie. What does that actually look like in my daily life?
Well, syntropy is the growth of complexity and future-generating capacity. Now, a hospice regime doesn't usually oppose syntropy by violently smashing things. It opposes it by occupying scarce, finite space with non-generative activity.
What kind of space?
Think about space not just as physical land, but as our attention, our time, our trust, apprenticeship slots, institutional seriousness.
Right, those are all strictly finite resources. We only have so much of them.
Exactly. If a non-generative sterile form occupies one of those generative slots, like if an algorithm monopolizes your attention so you don't learn an instrument, or a sterile bureaucracy occupies a regulatory slot so a new technology can't be tested, it displaces whatever actual generator could have grown there.
I see.
In a finite substrate, sterile occupation is active opposition. It's taking up the sunlight and water that a real tree needs to grow.
So, if we are living in a hospice mode where the macro selection environment aggressively rewards sterile output over true generators, where funding and status flow toward metrics rather than mastery, are we just doomed to calcify? Is the whole system just going to slowly power down until the oak tree collapses?
The environment is incredibly hostile to generators right now, absolutely. But fortunately, Kunis provides a way out. He introduces the concept of local spores.
Local spores.
Right. Even in a hospice civilization, the environment isn't completely dead. Generators do survive, but they survive in spite of the selection environment, not because of it.
I was really struck by the historical examples Kunis used here. Like how the Moscow mathematical schools somehow thrived during the stagnation of the Soviet era. I mean, the Soviet system was highly anti-centropic, heavily bureaucratized, totally hostile to free thought. How does a spore like that survive in such a dead environment?
It survives through intense local protection of the chain. A small group of people agree to uphold a rigorous standard among themselves, completely ignoring the metrics demanded by the broader regime.
Just flying under the radar.
Yeah. Or look at late Rome. As the empire's administrative capacity collapsed, the monastic system preserved and transmitted the cognitive and social capital that would become the foundation of Europe for the next millennium.
Wow.
The monks weren't trying to save the empire, right? They were just maintaining their local practice. These are local spores.
It's like becoming a human seed vault. You know the Svalbard global seed vault in the Arctic?
Yes, the Doomsday Vault.
Exactly. You're intentionally storing and practicing the real, deep, illegible knowledge, even if it's not currently rewarded by the algorithm or your boss or the quarterly earnings report. You do it so that when the environment eventually shifts and society is ready for a new foundry phase, the raw materials actually exist to build with.
That's a brilliant way to look at it. Kunis calls this the spore strategy. And this raises an important question. What is the specific direction for repair? The fix for our current malaise is never more output.
Right, you can't just metric your way out of it.
You cannot metric your way out of sterile generativity. The repair is to protect the chain.
Protect the chain.
Yes. In music, that means protecting the local scene and the physical apprenticeship infrastructure from being displaced by commodity slop. In your daily work, it means deliberately restoring craft and standards, demanding quality of yourself and your peers, even if it's not strictly required by the company's compliance protocol.
You do it anyway.
Exactly. In finance, it means holding institutions accountable for whether they are forming productive capital or just extracting rent. We have to stop optimizing for the legible output at the expense of the illegible capacity. We have to pay the actual cost of maintaining the substrate.
Which brings me right back to you, listening to this deep dive. I want you to take a moment and audit your own life through this lens. Look at your hobbies, look at your workplace, look at the institutions you participate in. Are you participating in a practice that regenerates the chain?
That's the key question.
Are you passing on tacit knowledge, training your taste, raising the standard for the person coming up behind you, or are you just producing sterile output to satisfy a metric?
It is a rigorous diagnostic to run on your own life. But as the essay notes, once you see the pattern of outputs without generators, it is completely impossible to unsee.
It really is everywhere. And I want to leave you with one final provocative thought to mull over. If sterile generativity is fundamentally about optimizing outputs while destroying the internal generator, what if our modern cultural obsession with life hacks, hyperscheduling, and endless self-optimization is actually a personal level manifestation of this hospice mode?
Oh, wow.
By constantly hacking our way to the finish line, trying to bypass the friction, the failure, and the slow, messy apprenticeship of actually living, are we subtly hollowing out our own internal capacity for deep, enduring transformation? Are we turning ourselves into human astroturf?
That is the ultimate question of the palliative society. Are we preserving our output while consuming our own souls?
Keep asking the hard questions, look past the visible leaves, and remember to protect the chain. See you next time on The Deep Dive.